everyone, and welcome to the All It Takes a Goal podcast, the best place in the entire world, including all of Canada, all of it, to learn how to build new thoughts, new actions, and new results. I'm your host, John Acuff, and today I'm joined by Jeremy Utley. Who's that? I'm so glad you asked. Jeremy Utley is the Director of Executive Education at Stanford's acclaimed Hasso Plattner Institute of Design, aka the D.school, where he leads the D.school's work with organizations. Stanford, very, very impressive. He's a self-proclaimed recovering MBA, spreadsheet junkie, and management consultant, and he now studies innovation in large enterprises and startups. He advises CEOs and senior leadership teams in the United States, Europe, and Asia on growth and innovation strategy, and has led scores of capacity building initiatives worldwide in his last dozen years at Stanford. He's a prolific blogger and podcaster and is a co-author alongside with Perry Kleban. Perry. I'm just going to say Perry because I'm sure I brutalized that last name. Perry Kleban. I think it's a silent H. They wrote a book together called Idea Flow, the only business metric that matters. It's due out from Penguin Portfolio. I had a couple books with Penguin Portfolio, amazing publisher. And he's happily married. He's a father of 4 lovely daughters. And we had a fun conversation. I actually got to do something he runs called the Masters of Creativity with Stanford. It was really, really fun. Online program, big international audience. And I geek out in this interview about ideas because here's the thing. I don't believe in writer's block. I believe in idea bankruptcy. If you can't come up with a good idea, it just means you haven't been feeding your work. You haven't been deliberate about creating ideas and crafting ideas and collecting ideas. I talk a little about that in this episode. It's the way I've been able to write so many books, and I've got so many more that I'm going to write because I'm really deliberate about how I think about ideas. And Jeremy is an expert on that. So I definitely geek out in this episode. We're about to jump in, but first, a quick message about the sponsor of today's episode. Every year, I set crazy big goals, and every year, there's one productivity tool that I use to help me reach them, the Finish Calendar. I've been using it for over a decade, and it's helped me crush goals like running 1,000 miles in a year, growing my business, and writing a New York Times bestselling book. Thousands of people have bought them over the years too. Why? Because it works. It's not magic, it's science. Study after study has shown how important tracking your year is. But my favorite came from the University of Konstanz in Germany. They showed that when you track when and where you're going to work on something, you double your chances of success. Let me say that again. You double your chances of success. This calendar is massive. It's beautiful, it's motivational, and it comes in paper or dry erase. On top of all the other amazing features, you can choose to display it vertically or horizontally because this bad boy is also double-sided. If you've got a big goal or a lot of big goals, grab a Finish Calendar today at finishcalendar.com. Once again, that's finishcalendar.com. All right, let's jump into my interview with Jeremy. All right, Jeremy, I'm looking forward to this. We've already done some fun stuff together over the last couple of months. So excited that you're here. Can't wait for my audience to learn more about what you do and experience all things creativity and Stanford and Jeremy. So thank you and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so I want to jump right in. On your 10th birthday, you told your father that when you grew up, you wanted to be one of those people who carry boxes with handles, briefcases.
Yes.
Like, if you told your 10-year-old self that you would end up at Stanford doing what you're doing, what would he have said?
What's Stanford? Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, just no clue, right? I mean, at the time when I was 10 years old, I was a preacher's kid in Tulsa, Oklahoma on vacation. The vacations that we took on our double-digit birthday was to Dallas. And we stayed at Holiday Inn and we're sitting in the hot tub. So that's the context. Okay. Yeah. Me and my dad, preacher dad from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
What kind of pastor?
Non-denominational kind of evangelical church. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And we're just sitting in the hot tub. He's like, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, yeah, you know those guys who carry the boxes with handles on them? I want to do that. I'd probably seen one of them in Dallas. Probably because we went to a Mavs game that night.
Okay.
This is back in like the Jason Kidd era when he's a
Jason Kidd.
player. Yeah. And yeah, I'm sure I saw somebody carrying a box with a handle and I thought that guy looks like he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, he's going somewhere.
He
Look
is
at that
like,
guy.
He's determined. He's walking quickly. I want to do
like
that.
His gait. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The way his jacket kind of, flaps in the breeze. It's all very appealing.
Yeah. So fast forward from then to now, describe to people who are listening what it is you do at Stanford. Because it's pretty, in my opinion, it's pretty amazing. Tell us about what it is that you actually do there.
In short, I help people come up with ideas very simply. Sometimes that's executives from big companies. Sometimes it's entrepreneurs who are trying to launch businesses. Sometimes it's students who are trying to reinvent their lives. But generally speaking, what I'm doing when I'm in the classroom is helping people come up with ideas. And then the other thing, and the other way you and I know each other, is I host a pretty fun and engaging speaker series called Masters of Creativity, where I get to showcase a bunch of incredible entrepreneurs, authors, activists, entertainers, etc., and just talk about creative practice in the context wherever they're coming from.
Mm-hmm. And it's really international. That's what struck me. Because I got to do it a couple of months ago. I was really struck by how international the audience was, because we open it up to questions and there'd be, here's a question from India, here's a question from Sweden, here's a question from Finland. And so that was super fun for me. What was the path to Stanford for you? So, because I'm a pastor's kid and I veered just right at Stanford. I was on my way and then I was like, I just veered right. What was your path from kid to Stanford?
Weirdly, I remember in high school, a friend of mine who was a couple years older than me, he went to a college visit at Stanford and he came back with a Stanford t-shirt and he gave it to me and he said, "You're going to go here." And I didn't know Stanford from Sanford, Connecticut.
Yeah.
And so that just maybe incepted the idea just a little bit. But then for me, I went to UT in Austin. It's a, state school, most affordable school I could go to. They gave me a full ride, which I think, by the way, was $3,000. That was crazy. The full ride. And so I did that. And, for me, it's a pretty circuitous route, but I studied finance mostly because it was the only major I heard of that didn't require a foreign language. And I was just trying to get out of whatever unpleasant work I could possibly get out of. Little did I know that was going to land me in spreadsheets, which are a whole other foreign language. But I learned pretty quickly financial analysis was not my, it was actually, interestingly, I was about to say it's not my favorite thing. I was good at it. You can learn skills that you're good at, but you don't enjoy. And there's kind of a question of what's a contribution I want to make to the world? Is it only what I'm capable of doing from an ability perspective? Is interest or passion? How do those things layer in? But for me, I knew I didn't want to go into investment banking. So I went into the next best job that I could find, which was management consulting. And really quickly, I discovered I didn't like that either. And so I came to Stanford actually as a career reset. So I went to business school at Stanford primarily to figure out, okay, I've learned what I don't want to do with my life. What do I want to do with my life?
And so you finished business school, and then how do you transition to actually being employed by Stanford?
Yeah. So business school is 2 years long, and in the summer in between years, because I knew I didn't like my consulting job, I signed up to go back after school, of course, right? Because I knew I didn't like it. So let's just do it a little bit longer. But because I had made that decision, I had a little bit more freedom in the summer between years of business school. It was summer 2008. And so I actually went and worked at a startup in India. I had thought I want to be involved with economic development. I had spent the previous summer, my wife and I were married. We had spent our summer in Zambia working in an AIDS orphanage. And I had spent a summer in college working in Bolivia at a startup incubator. So I had seen some, South American experience. I'd seen some African experience. And I really thought I want to do poverty alleviation kind of work. And I wanted to be in the developing world. So when I was searching for internships, because I already knew supposedly what job I was going to have when I got done with school, I was a little bit more liberal in my search. So I ended up searching for developing world, primarily Asia opportunities at venture-backed startups. And I ended up landing a job at a really cool organization called d.Design, which makes solar-powered lanterns for folks who live off the grid, who typically burn kerosene. That's, it's terrible for the, indoor air quality. A lot of homes burned down because of that, et cetera. So they had raised some venture financing and we're off to the races. And that's just the kind of environment I wanted to be in. So I was there for 4 months. And while I was there, there's a designer down the hall who's doing really cool stuff. Like we were sharing an apartment there outside of Delhi in this town called Noida. And I'd be, jamming on the spreadsheets and Joe would be gone for a couple days and he'd come back. I'd say, Joe, where have you been? He's like, oh, I was living in the slum. I was, working with people. I was testing new products. And I'm going, what are you talking about? Living in the slums? What are you doing? Yeah. And that was my introduction to design, was seeing kind of a designer up close and personal do his thing in the context of, primary research and prototyping and experimentation. And after I kept popping my head in his office, he started going, dude, you're a D.school kind of guy. You need to go check out the D.school. And I didn't know really what that was. So when I came back to Stanford, my second year, I just spent all of my elective credits taking classes at this thing called the D.school, which is kind of a hub for interdisciplinary collaboration at Stanford. For folks like me, if you're in the business school or if you're in the law school, medical, engineering, whatever, you can take classes at the D.school. And that was my introduction to design.
That's a really interesting route. I'm curious, how did you get opened up to how big the world is? So like we talked about, you're 10, you live in Tulsa. So like who first started to say to you, okay, Jeremy, Tulsa is this size, but there's actually slums. There's actually other countries. There's actually other needs. What were some of the experiences that opened you up to a bigger conversation?
I think for me, it started with church-based mission trips and things like that, going maybe to build houses in Mexico or things like, even just in other cities in the United States, I participated in stuff like that. I think it gave me a little bit more of a worldview, but it was mostly about, humanitarian relief. What can I do to help? It wasn't really until business school that I feel like my worldview was really opened in terms of the number of jobs that can be done in the world. When I was 15, I worked at Chick-fil-A. And I thought, I was all about getting people through the drive-thru as quickly as possible, And then when I was in college, I worked at Macaroni Grill. And I was all about eating as many of those loaves of bread before my shift in the back as possible, and my dad he was a preacher. Then he became a lawyer. My mom worked at Dillard's in the mall, and so my view of kind of the jobs to be done was fairly limited, I would say. Entrepreneurship really wasn't even on my radar at all as a thing to be done. Authorship, even being a teacher, none of those things were really jobs that were in my consideration set. But I think it's when I came to business school, I started, there's all sorts of clubs, there's all sorts of people coming from different countries and industries. You start talking to them and you go, wait, you can do that for a living? And you talk to the next person, wait, you can do that for a living? I didn't know people did that, right? So it's kind of a very slowly unfolding process for me. I'm a slow learner.
Yes. See, I don't know. I don't think so. Because the experiences you've had sound like an 80-year-old person. Like the variety is longer than, because then I spent 4 months in India, then I did this. So you get to the D.school, or you start taking electives and you kind of fall in love with the idea of what the D.school is. Yeah. And then how do you transition to your full-time at Stanford? What's the next rung on the ladder? Well,
so after that year of classes, I was really torn between either going back to my consulting job, which I already knew I didn't really, it didn't resonate with my heart, but it was financially the wise thing to do. And I was really wrestling with that. I had a good friend who had launched an amazing organization that's since really taken off. I probably am stupid for have not joined. It was called Nuru. And he was doing poverty alleviation. He was starting in Kenya, and he since moved out of Kenya and into and out of Ethiopia. Part of his model is to exit countries where he enters so that he doesn't create dependency. So exiting is part of the model. Anyway, he was a force recon Marine who learned if you want to be fighting terrorism, you need to be fighting poverty. And I was really compelled by his vision.
That's interesting. Yeah.
He's an amazing guy, an incredible, you should look him up. His name is Jake Harriman. He's a remarkable individual. I admire him deeply. And the work he's done with Nuru is truly incredible. At that juncture in my life, it was basically the decision set before me was go back to a job that's financially lucrative, but you already know you don't like it. Or go move to Kenya and work for a nonprofit And who knows if you'll ever be able to pay off your student loans. Those were kind of my two choices. And then right in the middle of that kind of decision moment, this is, spring 2009, the D.school, one of the founders of the D.school, his name's George Kemble, and he was the executive director of the D.school at the time. And he just started saying, hey, I really feel like there's something here. You're a fit for the program and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I'd love for you to stick around for a year. And so I started exploring what that might look like. And they had at the time what's known as the Fellows Program, which is basically a year-long faculty development kind of farm training program. So they invited me to join for 1 year. And that was a pretty easy, it was basically, I was deciding to not decide yet. So because I had that, I thought, I can delay my decision for a year. And
extra
I went to my firm. Yeah, exactly.
Away.
That's it. I'm all about preserving optionality. So I went back to the firm and I said, hey, I can come back now. By the way, remember 2009 is kind of like right after the housing crisis.
Not a great year.
A little and I didn't have enough savvy to realize I was probably doing them a favor. But I said, hey, would you mind if I waited a year? And they said, oh, you get to be a faculty member at Stanford? Do that for sure. Yeah. And so it was just the context was I'm just doing this for a year. But pretty quickly it became clear to me, I love this. And then the question is, what do you do when you find work that you love and you still got bills to pay and there's financial arrangements and your word is your bond and your yes means yes, and all this stuff.
Dude, you're out in California, like you're by Stanford. It's, from what I hear, not the cheapest state.
Not cheap. Not like Texas, that's for sure.
Yeah. You got a bunch of bills to pay.
It's real considerations. My wife and I had maxed out we got a bunch of 0% interest credit cards. Yep. We maxed out all of them. We did everything we could do to kind of scrap it together.
Yeah.
And ultimately, when push came to shove, I flew to Dallas and I sat down with a handful of the partners who had really gone to bat for me, who were in my corner, who I trusted and who I felt personally beholden to. And I just explained the situation because at that time, right, about kind of 9 months into my fellowship, there was an opportunity to start leading the executive education program at the D.school. And I just put the decision before them. I said, hey, I'm prepared to come back here. I made an agreement to come back. I don't feel like I'd be being true to myself if I did, but I really want to get your input. And to a person, to a man, to a woman, each one of them said, you can't come back here. You'd be crazy. Yeah. And that was a really surprising moment because I thought they were all going to hold my feet to the fire and make me do it. And they didn't. And to their credit, I mean, they really gave me permission to pursue what I considered at the time to be a pretty deviant path, very far off. Up until that point, it was pretty much doing what I'd planned on doing. And that was a big departure from the plan.
Well, and now it's easy to see now 10 years, because that's 12 years later?
Yeah.
This is 2009, 2010. So 12 years later, it's easy to see now, okay, well, it worked. Like it was, and we often do that. Like we go, I knew it would work then. You didn't know it would work then. So you jump in, and what's your first role? Like what's your first role at Stanford?
It was called a design fellow. And my first, and I hear this is funny you say that. I start on a Monday, August 31st, 2009. Mm-hmm. And George Kemble, myself and another individual named Thomas Both were the two fellows that year. And George says, hey, welcome to the D.school. Just so you know, on Thursday, all of the biomedical designers are going to have a design thinking training Thursday and Friday, 2 full days. There's 15 of them. They're world-class doctors and physicians and surgeons from around the world. You guys are giving them their training.
Yeah.
And me and Thomas.
Monday to Thursday.
Monday. Yeah, exactly. And we look at each other like, wait, we are? What do you mean? And that was my first, when you say what was the first thing you did, I spent Monday through Wednesday preparing to deliver a 2-day workshop in the last 2 days of my first week.
Wow. Yeah, that's one of those where you're like, let's use a lot of Q&A. What do you guys think?
Exactly.
Let's open it up to table discussion. What do you guys think?
Totally.
Oh man. So you start leading teams. Yeah, you start leading teams. And how has it evolved over the last 10 years? What you do there?
I've done a bunch of stuff. But as far as the exec ed programs are concerned, when George and the folks who ran the D.school invited me to stick around beyond that 1 year mark, the reason they invited me to stick around was there was an opportunity to build the executive education programs into more of a business, kind of capital B, revenue generating, predictable business. It had been before kind of a bespoke offering where we did really interesting, high touch, kind of very interesting work with organizations, but it wasn't really a scalable model yet. And so what we did was, I joined that team, and then another individual, my co-author, Perry Claiborne, basically what happened was George said, Jeremy, do you want to run this? And I said, I'm looking around the D.school and I see most of the people who are successful are pairs. They're duos, teams of people who are running initiatives. And the person who had just been running the initiative that they were kind of offering was an individual. I had perceived had been in need of a collaborator. And so I said, if I'm going to do this, I want a collaborator. And George said, well, this guy, Perry Claiborne, he's an experienced executive. He had run Patagonia. He was just stepping down as having been the CEO of Timbuktu, the messenger bag company. Yeah. But he'd been a kind of part-time faculty member at Stanford for 20 years. And he said, hey, what if Perry is your partner? Yeah. And I said, wow, I mean, that'd be amazing if he'd be willing to do that. And fortunately enough, Perry was willing to do it. And we started partnering there in 2010. And one of the big changes we make was reflected in the programming of the curriculum of the programs. So whereas before, say the Hewlett Foundation says, we want to learn about design. What had happened, what an executive program was a bunch of designers get in the room and say, okay, starting from a blank canvas, what are we going to tell them about design? Yeah. We did that program. And then, and we might say, John, which lecture are you most interested in doing? And you'd start from scratch, right? And then a month later, Fidelity would call and they'd say, hey, we want to learn about design. And we'd start totally blank canvas, new team of people. What should we tell them? No, whatever, not whatsoever. Yeah. And now, Jeremy, why don't you do that lecture? We do it totally different. And so there wasn't a lot of standardization in place. And what Perry and I did is we said, okay, this is the content. This is it right here. Yeah. And we're going to have the same people deliver that content. And what we're going to do is we're going to really develop the student experience side of things, because there's no way to experiment if you aren't kind of clear on where you're executing. You can't experiment everywhere all at once, right? Yeah. So we kind of took the curriculum off the table as a vehicle for experimentation, or to say it differently, we started experimenting as a team, but keeping that kind of a closely held circle of experimentation rather than a very broad and loose circle of experimentation. And what we allowed from our broad network of collaborators, and we've got, a bunch of coaches, scores of coaches who will come in and they'll leave their job at GoPro or Reach Records or wherever it is to come in and be a coach for a week. And where they're responsible for innovating is in the small team context. So every coach has 5 people. Man, kill that. Make that your own, make it unique. But you as an individual contributor, as a coach who's coming in, from a full-time job, you don't have to worry about the broader context of the program. That's something, it all makes perfect sense in retrospect. Mm-hmm. But we kind of built that into a business. And so now it's much more of a standardized experience. We're still iterating. We're still changing a lot of things. Every program is different and unique. But we're a lot clearer about who's responsible for what level of iterations and changes and what's not going to change, what is going to change. And what that's allowed us to do is it's allowed us to expand a lot and broaden the offer to a lot more individuals because we're clear on what the offer is.
So if I come in as an individual, or say I'm listening to this right now and I go, okay, this guy seems to know a lot about creativity. He thinks a lot about ideas and you and I talk a lot about like where ideas come from and how you shape them and grow them, make them profitable, increase the amount you get to have. If I came in and said, okay, Jeremy, I want to be more creative, because you wrote a book called Idea Flow. That's the new book. How would you even start that conversation if I said to you, I want to be more creative in my life? Like broad topic, what would be some of the practical things you'd encourage somebody to do? Well,
first things first, rather than tell you what to do, I'd say, tell me about the last time you were creative.
Okay.
Right? What was that like? Or, one thing I like to do is say, diagram your last breakthrough. What happened? Like if you had to say there's 10 steps to a breakthrough process, what is it for you?
Yeah. Do people have a hard time even knowing they've had a breakthrough?
Yes.
Like, does it take them a minute to even identify one?
Absolutely. But what happens there is it's because a lot of times what we know is it's often the exceptional stuff that you think about dismissing or disregarding that's actually interesting. But no one ever thinks about operationalizing that stuff. That's like I don't always do that. But it's like, no, why not? That's interesting, right? Yeah. And so if you get somebody to kind of think about when's the last time you felt like you had a really great idea, a lot of times they find, well, I talked to this unexpected person and I happen to be reading this other book or watching this movie and I was doing this side project. And what they see is there's all sorts of variables at play in this creativity equation. And they have been creative. They have had really good ideas, and it's not a part of some rigid process. We can talk process and we can talk hygiene and all that stuff. But when someone sees that they have the capacity, and for me, I mean, that's one of my big ahas is I have the capacity to conceptualize something that would be really special, that would really make a difference in the world. I didn't realize that about myself for a long time. And that was one of the kind of epiphany moments I had as a student was like, there was a specific time where it's like, I had an idea that was totally new to the world. Yeah. That's like really cool. But the thing is, we all do. We don't really appreciate it and we don't really document those things. So I'd start there. But then after, getting someone to kind of document their own breakthrough process or whatever, the really simple thing is, well, think about another hobby or ability that you've cultivated. Mm-hmm. What is it? It could be speaking, maybe in your case.
So does that relax them to see the thing? Because I imagine there's pressure when you say like, what's a breakthrough? They think like, well, I never invented Google, so I don't have a breakthrough. And then so do you enter the hobby part to go, there's something special hidden in your day you don't think is special. I'm going to help you find it.
Well, I think if we define breakthrough as Google, then we're all toast. There's like two people who've done that. But I think, basically, Larry, Sergey, then we're all like up creek. No, but most people have you can start to get more granular about when was the time that you were surprised by a solution that came to mind, that you came up with, right? And when was the time that you caught yourself off guard or that you were delighted to have thought of an idea, right? It could be in your personal life. It could be, I was just talking to an executive at a Japanese pharmaceutical company this morning, and she was saying, we're struggling with this issue at home with my husband. And she said, ordinarily I get really upset, but because I've been reading your book, I said, what if we reframe the problem? And we had this amazing realization that we had both been thinking that the problem was one thing, but it was actually this other thing, right? We have these moments in our lives. But to me, getting to the question of hobby or ability, it could be I play the piano or I'm a swimmer or whatever it is. And then I go, well, how long did it take you to develop ability? Most people will say,
it takes years.
And I'm still not there yet is almost always the next thing. Right?
Yeah.
And I go, okay, let's start there. Because when we talk about being creative, a lot of people think like in terms of Neo, like the blue pill or the red pill. It's like, are you going to make me creative today? And it's like, like, am I going to make you a pianist today? Right? Like think in terms of any other ability you have in your life, how much time and effort and attention and care you put into it. Mm-hmm. If you want to be more creative, think in terms like, if you're going to play the piano, you got to do your scales. You're not booking Carnegie Hall next week, right? Yeah. If you want to be a swimmer, you're doing laps. You're not like asking to be dropped off in the middle of the ocean next week if you've never swum before, right? But when it comes to creativity or innovation, if you ask people, what are your scales? What are your laps? It's just like this dumbfounded look like, what do you mean? It's like, well, let's talk about what our scales are. Let's talk about what doing laps looks like. And let's think more because for most people, they think about innovation as this lightning bolt moment. It just happens suddenly.
Eureka. We have a word for it. Eureka.
Yeah. Or if not that, then they think of an event like a workshop. What we do at my work, we do a hackathon or we have a sprint, which is all good. I'm all about sprinting and hacking. That's fine. Mm-hmm. But the point is, if you think in terms of an event rather than a practice, you approach the nurturing of the capability in a certain way. But, I was a very bad track and field athlete in high school. So I ran the 1600 poorly. I more like walked the 1600, but I would never show up to a track meet without stretching or warming up or having trained, right? We got people all the time going to sprints that they've got like Cheeto marks on their shirt.
That's funny.
Like at work, it's like, have you even stretched one time in your life? And they're like, no, but I'm here for the sprint. It's like, please, you're going to hurt yourself.
Yeah. And the team. You're going to hurt yourself and the team.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting about that, my version of that is when people tell me they're stuck on a goal, and I'll say, well, tell me about a goal that worked. And often they don't take the good things from the last thing to the new thing.
Yeah.
So they go, I don't know how to get in shape. And I'll go, well, tell me about a goal that worked. And then they'll tell me this elaborate thing they did to pay off debt. But they're not doing any of those things, bringing them forward.
Right.
So it's like the breakthrough doesn't get to happen again because they've left it all in the past.
Right.
You said a word there that I'd love to sit on for a second, reframing.
Yes.
Like the power of reframing. I think that's such a fascinating concept. Where does that fit into problem solving, creativity, idea flow?
Well, John Dewey, the educational reformer, said, a problem well put is half solved. And so a lot of times you realize the problem is the problem. That's what my friend Philippe Barreau, who runs innovation at Michelin, says. He said many times what we realize is the problem's the problem, meaning we're solving the wrong problem. And so reframing, I mean, in kind of classic design thinking terms, what that means is stating the problem from the customer's perspective. Because our default in business is to state the problem from our own organizational perspective or our own capability perspective. And what we teach students and executives to do is say, well, how does the customer see that problem? How do they describe it? And what are the words they use? But the kind of the more meta concept there is, and that's valuable in terms of design thinking. Cognitively speaking, when we're trying to kind of provoke our own imaginations, a really simple way I think about it is every question or problem statement is like it's like a blueberry or an acai berry. You know, it's antioxidant, you know, and it's got, by the way, I'm not a doctor. Don't take medical advice from me, but there's like a free radical. It seeks a free radical, you know, in your system. And to me, every way you think about framing a question is going to provoke slightly different ideas. So it's not actually about having the right question, but having a facility or a willingness to phrase the question in a bunch of different ways in order to provoke your thinking. Because what you're ultimately trying to do is provoke your own imagination.
Yeah.
And if you're only thinking of the problem in one way, that's it.
You get one imagination.
Exactly.
What are some of the practical tools people can do to provoke their own imagination? So if you, like, how would you stir it up?
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole chapter, not to sell the book. There's a whole chapter on this topic
to sell the book. We're trying to sell the book.
Okay.
Ignore what Jeremy just said. We got units to move.
Come on, people, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Get them while they're hot. No, but I mean, we often use this phrase, how might we? Is a welcoming, inviting phrase. And there's a bunch of ways to use how might we's to provoke imagination or to see different angles of a particular problem. I would say kind of an elegant way that I like to think about asking better questions is when I find myself fixated on a solution, and you see this in workshops or in classes all the time, that students will do a bunch of ethnography work with users and they go, you know what she needs? She needs a nanny, or whatever, right? I'm just making this up. And you go, well, here's a simple, and you can take whatever solution you're thinking of and just call it, X. And then you can just ask the question, what would it do for her or for me if we gave her X? Well, okay. So what would it do for her if we gave her a nanny? Oh, it would give her more free time in her afternoons. Great. Then the problem we're trying to solve is how might we give her free time in her afternoons? And by the way, there's like 1,000 ways to do that, right?
Not just nanny, not just
nanny.
X.
Nanny is one of 1,000 solutions to that problem. Yeah. But what we do is by kind of abstracting from the solution to the problem that it's solving. And by the way, there are probably 100 other ways to state that problem than give her free time in the afternoon. But as long as you're fixated on the solution, then it's like, well, what's the hourly rate of the nanny? Like our ideation is very, very limited. But if you abstract out a level to the question or the problem you're trying to solve, or even better, state a handful of possible problems that might be solving, oftentimes you can provoke yourself to think of way more interesting ideas. And that's the essence of reframing.
So you're stirring it up. You're looking at it from multiple angles. You're getting around from just one solution. And it reminds me, this was an Uber driver told me this, the Abilene. Have you ever heard the Abilene?
No.
It's just a management technique where it's a metaphor for 5 people that are going to Abilene and no one wants to go. So halfway there, somebody finally goes, why are we even going to Abilene? And you realize they all thought the other person wanted to go and fight. So it's a quick question. Go, are we on the road to Abilene right now? Are we trying to solve something we don't even want to solve?
Right.
It's not even a problem we should own.
Right.
And I always, because I guess they use Abilene because there's just not a tremendous amount of things going on in Abilene. If your dad had taken you on vacation to Abilene,
well, you just a different analogy.
Like, yeah, exactly. What are we going to do in Abilene? So because I've seen people and individuals try to solve the wrong problem, create one solution that doesn't do anything, come up with 50 solutions without ever going, what's the problem?
Right.
So I love this approach. For you, was there pressure? Like, there's a lot to put into a book, especially when you've had a 10-year runway with kind of the Stanford experience, the creativity. Was there pressure to get it all in, or did you have a sense of, I'm going to be writing multiple books so I can relieve that pressure?
You know, someone in this group that I mentioned earlier, this pharmaceutical company I was talking to earlier this morning, they asked, how did we come to the idea of the book? So I'll answer that. Yeah. I realized thinking through that, answer the question you just asked, which is, you know, there's 100 different things we try to convey over the course of an experience, say, you know, whatever the number is. Some things people go, oh yeah, of course. So like we say, you know, people matter. Nobody's going, what?
Yeah.
You know, everybody's like, oh yeah, totally. You know, and we say, you know, and framing your problem, you know, kind of concisely really helps. Nobody goes, wait, what? Everybody goes, oh yeah, cool. Then we say, you know, being cheap and scrappy in your experimentation is way more affordable than like expensive experiments. People go, oh yeah. But there's one thing. And so we're stringing together all of these truths in a particular way or a particular sequence. Most of the time people go, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about doing that, but it totally makes sense, right? There's one thing that we often say and people go, what? Which is kind of what became the anchor paradigm of the book, which is, you know how many ideas it takes to have a good idea? Linus Pauling, who's the, you know, only individual in history to win the Nobel Prize twice as an individual. Someone asked him, and he almost won a third, by the way. He was neck and neck with Watson and Crick in discovering the double helix structure of DNA. And he would have had a third if he had done it first. But somebody asked him, hey, how do you have so many good ideas? And Linus Pauling's response was, well, to have a good idea, you need to have a lot of ideas.
Yeah.
And what we've observed, and there's some research at Stanford on this, and what we've observed is people kind of, what's the word? They dramatically underestimate how many ideas is a lot of ideas. If you ask somebody, how many ideas do you need? Most people go, like I was recently with a group of consultants. There's like 300 people in the room. We told every 8 top table, you guys come to consensus. How many ideas do you need to get a good idea? And the winning group gets Bose headphones. Okay. That was like the prize.
Oh, nice.
Which, by the way, I dropped the phrase Bose headphones like 20 times. So I'd make sure they gave me a pair, which was very nice of them. I tried to make sure the event organizers knew that I wanted some. But the kind of average response across these tables of, you know, very senior consultants worldwide was 20. You need about 20? 20. That's
that takes 20? Get out of here, dude.
Dude, I'm not kidding you.
20?
But here's the thing, John. You're going to love this. The table in the front row, in the very middle, the chairman of the company gets up. And the question is, how many ideas do you need to have a good idea? And he goes, 1. You need 1. And we're like, and then of course we change the slide. And the number is like, from a research perspective, it's like 2,000. And you're like, I feel kind of bad doing this. Like, I wish the chairman had a better setup. Intuition, right? I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
He or she should have seen that coming, that this is a setup. Like, you don't want to, the number's not going to be 1.
You don't ask a question like that when the number's going to be 1, right? But that figure, this idea that, to get to a commercial success, you need like 2,000 ideas. You can backtrack out of the funnel and you get it, right? And we could walk through it if you want. We don't have to. But the point is, at every stage of kind of the exploration funnel, the conversion rate makes sense, but nobody extrapolates across the entire funnel and goes, oh, whoa, I need a lot of ideas. Yeah. And then and as we start interacting with organizations, whether it's in the world or at Stanford, we notice time and again, whenever that slide comes up, people are like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And we realize, oh, that's the paradigm we've got to come at this with. I mean, this amazing, one of my favorite researchers, a guy named Dr. Dean Keith Simonson, he just won the Mensa Lifetime Achievement Award. Okay. So
pretty good.
Homeboy's not an idiot.
Yeah.
And he conducted this study across fields, sciences, arts, engineering, discovery, etc. And the long and short of it, not to bore you with a really long book, the long and short of it is the single greatest determinant of the quality of your ideas is the quantity of your ideas.
That's the single greatest.
Greatest determinant. So if you want better ideas, what should you look for? More
ideas.
But who's got a process for more?
Yeah. Nobody.
I mean, you asked me at the beginning, hey, what do you do at Stanford? And I said what I say everywhere I go in the world, which is I help people come up with ideas. If you had to guess, what is the universal response to that statement? Could be in Singapore, could be in Colombia, could be in Russia, Israel. Everyone in the world says the same thing. I say I help people come up with ideas. What do people say?
Do they say how?
How do you come up with a good idea?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I say, who said anything about good?
Yeah.
I didn't say good ideas. Right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, it's almost like good is inseparable in our minds from idea. And that's the problem. As long as you're only thinking about good ideas, you're toast.
Yeah. That's the thing I always say, that one of the shorthands for us is be brave enough to be bad at something new. Yes. And I'd say the same thing about that with ideas. Like, yes. But the reason I love this and I'm such a geek about this is I've had 1,037 ideas this year. I know that because I have a numerical list. I just wrote down 1,037 today. The other, like 1,035 was I'm working on a new book about bravery, that bravery is the skill that unlocks every other. Like bravery is the skill that unlocks every other. So will I use that? I don't know. The book won't come out for 3 years, right. But I know that idea 1,035, I had it, I captured it. I'm going to curate it. I'm going to work on it. I'm going to do a creative collision, if you will. So that I couldn't believe in this more. Like it would be impossible for me to be a bigger fan. Speaking of creative collisions, talk to people for a minute about what that is.
That the basic idea behind creative collisions is at the heart of an idea is a connection. Very simply. Yeah, somebody define an idea to a 5-year-old. I have a 5-year-old daughter. I heard some research that says that no one asks more questions in the world than a 5-year-old girl. I don't know if that's true, but I can attest it's a lot. She asked me, Daddy, what's an idea? And I can't give her a definition that doesn't require she look something up in the dictionary, right?
Yeah.
You start thinking, that's actually kind of hard.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, from a neurological perspective, very simply, an idea is a connection. Specifically, a connection between two things you already know. Okay. So the brain doesn't create from nothing. It's impossible. The human brain can, like neurologically, we're just connecting things, right? Yep. Well, then you realize if an idea is just a connection, you can think about it almost like Legos, then your experiences in life, you can be gathering Legos, conceptually speaking, right?
Yeah.
And the idea of creative collisions is being deliberate about grabbing new Legos.
It's so good.
That's it. That's the idea.
So good. So that lots of things can collide.
Exactly. And there are structured ways that you can do that. I mean, we can do it. Many people don't do it. Some people do it implicitly. And then some people have gone from the implicit to the explicit. It gets back to this idea of operationalizing the thing we already do, right? Chances are if somebody really broke down their last breakthrough, there's an unexpected connection that forms there, right? And then if you realize that, you go, oh, well, could you seek out a connection like that? I mean, give you a simple example, like somebody like Ben Franklin, like one of history's greatest innovators, forget author and statement, but just like innovator, right? Bifocals, the lightning rod, the Gulf Stream, libraries, the Continental Congress, for crying out loud. These are all of his ideas and many more. You can wonder, how does somebody like that have such an incredible breadth of ideas? For me, I always want to look at somebody's routine behaviors. Like the fact that you write things down and number them in a notebook is very meaningful, far more meaningful than something that you do randomly, right? Well, one thing that Ben Franklin did regularly was every week for 30 years, call it, that's what, 5,000 times, I don't know, or something like that. Don't put me on the spot. Don't put me on the spot to do math 30? Right now. Yeah, exactly.
You're at Stanford. I'm assuming you're like,
I'm not in the finance department anymore. I just use Google Sheets. No, but whatever the number is, he met with his junto. That's what he called it. A group of leather aprons wearers who every week would meet for a set period of time and they would discuss certain questions like, has anyone moved to Philadelphia recently that we ought to know and why? Has anyone's business fallen into disrepute and what was that reason? Are there any scientific discoveries that have bearing on what we're doing and what are they? Right? They had this long list of questions, but you go, homeboy did this for 30 years. 30 years.
How many people were in this? How many people were in this
Small group. It's like 12 to 20 people. Small group.
Okay.
But they met regularly. And to me, I mean, backing up a level, that is a routine for creative collisions.
Yeah.
He's being deliberate. He's operationalizing this notion of collisions and he's seeking out new inputs. And when people think about inspiration, like, my wife was a fashion designer when we met. I'm a finance guy. She's in fashion. And she'd say, I got to go to New York to do an inspo trip. I'm like, what is when I think of inspiration, I'm thinking of like a cheesy poster that says courage. And it's like a salmon swimming into a grizzly's mouth, right? It's like, that's inspiration.
Got a waterfall. Yeah.
And it's painful, right? But when designers use the word inspiration, what they mean is they're gathering inputs. And so what I've come to define inspiration as the disciplined pursuit of unexpected input. That's simple. But are you disciplined? Is there a time and for most people, especially people in business, there is never a means or a mechanism by which they are seeking to learn something they don't already know or seeking some new input.
Yeah.
And then they wonder, why is the tap not turning on? Well, no new input, no new output. It's that simple.
It's so good, dude. So good. So there's three things that creative collision, because I think a good conversation is a creative collision in the same way that
100%.
So the three things for me that made me think of was one, I always tell people I don't believe in writer's block. I believe in idea bankruptcy. If you can't write, you haven't fed your bank of ideas enough.
Yes.
Like that's idea bankruptcy, not writer's block. So I feed I never sit down with a blank piece of paper. I bring 1,000 friends.
Yes.
And we have a lot of collisions. The second thing, and I think I said this on the Masters of Creativity session we did, Dorothy Parker, creativity is a wild mind and a disciplined eye.
Yes.
The wild is she collects. The discipline is you see the connections. And then I think the reason leaders, individuals don't do the inspiration trip is that they don't see value in it.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of Orbiting the Giant Hairball by Gordon MacKenzie. Did you ever read that?
Love it.
Yeah.
One of my favorites.
So he does the example where he says that a lot of people see creativity like a cow chewing its cud in the field, and a business person goes, oh, it's a waste of time. We should be milking them constantly. It's not profitable. And they don't understand. It took 22 hours of standing in the field to get 20 minutes of milking the cow, but the milk was part of the 22 hours that looked wasted.
Yes.
And if you divorce that, you don't get the milk.
Yes.
And so I think that people have a hard time going, oh, an inspiration trip. Like, what did you go to Soho? You took a photo, like you ate a crepe, like whatever. And you go, but if you divorce yourself from that, like you're not getting the stuff.
Well, it's like one way to think about it very simply is like I don't know if it's Edison. Somebody said 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration, right? Yeah. The 1% is what enables the 99%.
Yeah. And you can't take it away.
You got a lot of uninspired perspiration happening to no effect, right?
Yeah.
It's because there's no inspiration, right?
Yeah. That's so fascinating. What are the moments what have been some of the light bulb moments? You're already teaching this content. That's what's neat about the book. So idea flow isn't you had an idea for a book and you wrote it. Right. Idea flow is you had years and years and years and years and years of doing this and finally turned it into a book. Those are my favorite kind of books. Yeah. And you can tell there's a richness to it. There's a realness to it. What have been some of the eye-opening moments along the way that people go, oh, I get it. I was looking at this the wrong way. Oh, that surprised me. That caught me off guard. That's counterintuitive to what I was taught maybe as an executive. Because I guarantee most MBA programs don't have, here's your hardcore creativity class.
Not at all.
Here's your here's your inspiration. In the same way that dentists aren't told how to be CEOs and then they bomb their business.
Yes.
Because they have to be CEOs, not just dentists.
Yes.
But they don't get that at dental school. So what have been those moments?
Well, a couple of things come to mind. One is there's a really dangerous thinking trap that we all fall prey to called the Einstein effect. I like to think of this as the anti-Einstein effect. And it's the tendency, Abraham Lutyens identified it in 1942. It's been subsequently verified by people like Carl Dunker, by a team of researchers at Oxford. But basically the tendency that's documented there is for a human, when they identify a solution, two things happen. One, they stop looking for other solutions. Two, they're incapable of seeing better solutions. Okay. So if you become aware of that, you realize my tendency is to fixate on the first answer that comes to mind, which, by the way, empirically has nothing to do with the quality of the answer. But the first answer that seems passable, and the reason is Ari Kruglowski, I think a Russian psychologist, called this seeking cognitive closure. It turns out that ambiguity of the unknown is profoundly distressing to us psychologically. Yeah. And so what we do is we just grab onto the first answer that presents itself, regardless of the great fit. And the problem is life's not math. We joke about the fact that I couldn't multiply, 50 times 30, right? I mean, I can now that I'm thinking about it. By the way, I think it's 600, but either way. Wait, that's maybe 6,000. No. I don't know.
Isn't 3 times 5? It's 15. So it has to be 1,500, right?
Divided by 2. And then you take the square root of it. And then you take it to the fourth power.
You're confused. I'm a writer. Let's not.
But the point is, the point is simply, we just want the answer. That's it. We just want the answer. And we don't there's no evidence that suggests that the first idea is our best idea. And in fact, another piece of research, which I love, it's called the creative cliff illusion. If you survey folks or you ask them about it, their expectation is their creativity tends to dip over time. If you plot creativity over time, it goes down. But they call it the illusion because empirically, it's not true. Creativity doesn't dip over time. And in fact, you can have what I refer to as a creative ramp. It's possible to have a creative ramp. And the way to turn the cliff into a ramp, very simply, is you expect better ideas to come later. And
so you set that expectation.
Set the expectation. Yeah. So when you're thinking about solving a problem, are you fixated on the first solution that comes to mind, or are you even aware of that tendency? And then flipping, we call it doing the daily idea quota, where every day you flip your orientation from a fixation on the right answer to as many answers as possible. And the reason I mentioned math earlier is not all the very few of the problems we're facing today are math problems, meaning have one right answer, right? And by the way, physicists would tell you not even math problems have one right answer. But the vast majority of problems, like, what should I title this? What should I put the subject line of this email? There's not one right answer.
No.
Right. But we think of one thing and we put it in and then we never even look at it again. Right.
Yeah.
And what we suggest is at least once a day, just take one problem where your tendency is just to choose an answer and move on, and try to generate 10, because it will start to reinforce the muscle of diverging and the muscle of enduring that ambiguity, fighting that tendency towards cognitive closure. And that's part of the training that makes you prepared when it comes time to sprint.
It's a practice. It's a practice for other parts of your life.
And the thing is, like, I love thinking about it like this. My little sister played volleyball in high school. Okay. And she could, kick my butt to this day, way better. I noticed one time we were at the grocery store. My mom said, "Rachel, would you grab a jug of milk from the refrigerator?" And she went to the refrigerator. She grabbed the jug of milk. You know what she did on the way back to the cart? She did gallon curls, right? And then she put the milk in the cart. Why? Because to an athlete, every gallon of milk is a dumbbell.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if I'd said, "Rachel, whoa, what are you doing? Your coach isn't here. You're not wearing your volleyball uniform." She'd be like, What are you talking about? Like, I'm just getting strong. I want to get strong. Yeah. And the point is, there's a certain mentality that accompanies a desire to work on something, right? When you say, "I want to become more creative," all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, well, is the subject line of an email a jug of milk that I can do a few curls with?
Yeah.
Totally. If I see it that way.
It's all jugs of milk.
And that's why we say every problem is fundamentally an idea problem.
Yeah.
And if you realize what that means, it yields to a volume of possibilities. Then you go, okay, well, then the first thing I'm going to do is generate a volume of possibilities.
It's so good.
Right?
So good.
It's that simple.
I love that. So last 3 questions, because I could talk about this all day because it's right in my wheelhouse. You told me a story about you missed the solution. I believe it was you, not your brother. I think your brother clarified it for you. You missed a solution. You missed solving a problem that was very obvious.
Yes.
Tell that story, and then how can we not miss obvious solutions or generating lots of solutions?
So the reason I mention that story is because it's so, like the Men's Hair Club once said, I'm not only the president, I'm also a member. For me, I'm not only the writer of Idea Flow, I also need it. The reason that it's a valuable book is because I still need these tools every day. And I'm not knowing it doesn't mean you've perfected it. Right. And the experience I had the other day, it kind of illustrates the point is I'm driving down the highway. I've got a bunch of errands to do for my family, and my car is just stacked up with a bunch of stuff I got to take care of. And I had dumbly kind of stacked up this 40-pound cooler at like a Jenga brick of death in my passenger seat. And so every time I turn right, this Jenga brick just slams into my shoulder. It's like, and I can't get it. I'm driving, I'm on the highway, and I go, okay, I got like 45 or 50 minutes here. I've just resigned myself to rotator cuff damage, like permanent damage. I've kind of like jacked my elbow in there to just kind of be safe. But every time it's falling and hitting, it's hurting me. And then my brother calls me and we're just catching up. I've got him on my headphones. And a couple minutes into the conversation, he said, "Hey, dude, why do you keep grunting?" And I go, "Oh, sorry, I've got this stupid cooler. It keeps slamming into my shoulder. It's actually really hurting. It's kind of embarrassing." He's like, "Well, have you buckled it in?"
Yeah.
And I go, it was one of those moments. I just slapped my forehead. I was like, "Zach, I never even thought of it." He goes, "Well," and he does roofing in Texas. He's like, "Oh, whenever I'm in the truck, stuff's rolling around, I just buckle it in to be safe." And I go, I can't believe I didn't even think to ask for help. It was just this. And I actually took, in 1 minute, like while I'm still driving, I buckle this thing in and I solve the problem that 2 minutes ago I had resigned myself to suffering through for the next 50 minutes.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. There was it's all it took.
It's all it took. And the reason it spoke to me and the reason I took a photo of it and I sent it to him, I said, I'm the ideas guy. I'm the creativity expert. And yet when I'm facing a problem that is legitimately painful, I wrote a whole chapter on seeking outside perspectives. And if I had ever framed it up as, I'm facing a problem, then, and furthermore, one of the levers at my disposal to generate solutions to this problem is to ask someone who might have a perspective on this. It's a quintessential opportunity for me to use my own book. And yet I missed it. Right. And so to me, I took the picture mostly as a way of remaining humble that we're all in need of these reminders. And the more you practice these behaviors, the better you get at identifying when you get an idea problem.
I love that. That story is something I thought about multiple times. 2 last questions. You quoted like 50 other books in this podcast. So you're obviously a reader. What would you say is on your Mount Rushmore of nonfiction, productivity, high performance, creativity? Answer it any way you want. Mount Rushmore, these 4 books, minus any that you've written.
Mount Rushmore, I would say, because I'm into business and innovation, that intersection, I'd say John Gertner's The Idea Factory. It's a book about Bell Labs, which is just mind-blowingly good. Phil Knight's Shoe Dog. One of my favorite books ever. Just absolutely incredible. Isaacson's Ben Franklin. I love that book.
Okay. Over the Steve Jobs.
The thing about Steve Jobs, what I will give Steve Jobs maybe the edge on is I remember so many of those innovations because they happened in my lifetime. And so almost like to get the backstory on it is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I'll give you Steve Jobs. And then the last one I would say, Stephen Johnson's Where Good Ideas Come From.
I have that on my shelf. You recommended that. I bought it. I haven't read it yet, but you recommended that one. So those are 4 great recommendations. And we'll stick with Benjamin Franklin. I'm not trying to sell you on the Steve Jobs one. So all right, last question. Where can people find out more about you?
Check out the book website, ideaflow.design is where all the book resources live. And then I also blog every day at jeremyutley.design. I'm on Twitter, things like that. And then moc.stanford.edu is where folks can check out your episode and the other episodes of that series.
It's super fun. Well, dude, this was a blast. Love the book. Love the work you're doing. Can't wait to see what happens next. I think this is the first of many books that'll come out of this experience.
Yeah, I hope so. Hey, one thing I just remembered, we put a free chapter of the book on the website called How to Think Like Bezos and Jobs. Speaking of Steve Jobs.
Ah, nice.
If you want to check it out, go to ideaflow.design. It's totally free, but it's How to Think Like Bezos and Jobs. And it's a bunch of material almost like from the cutting room floor of our research process. There's only so many times you can reference Steve Jobs in an innovation book before it's
There is a limit, dude, where you have to be like.
So we put it all in the bonus chapter. It's all in the bonus chapter. If you want to geek out on Steve Jobs, we got you covered.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Jeremy, thanks for joining me today. This was a blast.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's interview with Jeremy Utley. We'll put all the links in the show notes as always. And thank you for reviewing my podcast. The reviews are super encouraging, super helpful, and a lot of them are pretty funny. You guys write some funny things in the reviews. So if you got 60 seconds or 90 seconds, if you want to be a little chatty, please write a review. Please make sure you follow or like or subscribe or whatever it is the kids are saying these days, and keep the reviews coming. I'll see you next week. And remember, all it takes is a goal. And don't forget to pick up your copy of the Finish Calendar. Brand new, massive, beautiful, double-sided, vertically or horizontally, paper or dry erase at finishcalendar.com. Once again, that's finishcalendar.com.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about the All It Takes Is a Goal podcast and to get access to today's show notes and exclusive content from John Acuff, visit acuff.me/podcast. Thanks again for joining us. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the All It Takes Is a Goal podcast.